Hello everyone. There are cases that happen and then are forgotten over time. But there are also deaths that, even after more than a century, still make people shudder every time they are mentioned. Today, I will tell you a true story, a bloody legend in the heart of splendid London. His name is known to the whole world, but no one knows his face. He left no traces, no fingerprints, no witnesses. He is Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel Ripper, a murderous ghost who spread terror in the heart of England in the late 19th century, and forever went down in history as the most mysterious serial killer in the world. 1888. London at that time was the heart of the British Empire, a city with bright lights and constantly developing. But to the east, silent and dark, lay Whitechapel, where the narrow, dirty, moldy streets were like the belly of a rotting monster. There, the poor crammed together in squalid tenements, where hunger, disease, and crime were commonplace. Women sold themselves to make ends meet, while men were drunk, unemployed, and ready to commit crimes at any moment. Into this scene appeared Jack. No one knew where he came from. No one knew where he was going. He stepped out of the darkness, cold, precise like a knife in the night. He chose his target, struck, and then disappeared, as if he had never existed. The police investigated, the people panicked, the press exploded, but all that remained were the bodies of women with gruesome cuts, bloody letters full of defiance, and a name that still makes humanity shudder: Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel, 1888. If London is the shining jewel of the British Empire, then White is a gray, damp, and rotten crack where the light of civilization cannot penetrate. Located in the east of the capital, Whitechapel is the poorest, darkest, and most dangerous area of Victorian London. Crime, disease, and poverty are three indispensable things in the picture of reality here. After the Industrial Revolution, immigrants from all over flocked to London in search of opportunities to change their lives. But instead of stable jobs, they were thrown into slums, living crowded in shabby houses without electricity, clean water, and no toilets. Whitechapel became the last refuge for those abandoned by society: the elderly, the sick, single women, prostitutes, orphans, and vagrants. The police could not control this area. They only had enough people to patrol at night, not enough to protect anyone. Every day there were robberies, assaults, beatings, rapes, and no one bothered to report them because no one believed the law could protect them. Among the thousands of people living in the darkness, there was an invisible but present force: prostitutes. They had no other choice. They had no education, no home, no money. Every night, they stood on the street corner, leaning against the wall, their eyes dry as they watched people pass by. They traded their bodies for a few coins to rent a bed for the night, or bought alcohol to forget another dirty day. Those women were Jack the Ripper's ideal targets. They were poor, anonymous. No one would come looking for them if they went missing, and society didn't care if they lived or died. The scariest thing was, Jack understood that. He didn't choose his victims randomly. He chose the weakest, the most despised, the most voiceless in society, and ended them in a brutal way that would make even the most cold-blooded killers shudder. There was no light, no hope, no justice. Whitechapel in 1888 was the perfect place for a demon in human form to lurk, and from its dark, filthy alleys, Jack the Ripper emerged. And then, on the dark morning of August 6, 1888, the real nightmare began. As the city was still shrouded in a thin layer of fog, a worker was making his way to the factory through a rundown block of flats in George Yard, the most brazen part of Whitechapel. As he climbed the stairs to the first floor, he stopped short. In the dim light of dawn, he saw something lying still on the stone floor. It was the body of a woman. She was lying on her back, her eyes wide and lifeless. Her clothes were torn, her lower body was bare, and blood soaked the floor. The worker was terrified and ran away, screaming for help. A policeman on patrol nearby rushed to the scene. When the forensics arrived, the sight before them was shocking. The victim had been stabbed 39 times all over her body, from the neck, chest, abdomen, thighs, to her private parts. The weapons used were not just knives but also sharp objects such as chisels. The evidence showed that the killer had acted savagely, out of control, as if venting his deep hatred for the victim. She was identified as Martha Tabram, 38, a poor prostitute, living in the slums. The night before, she had gone out drinking with a few men, believed to be soldiers, and then split up with an unidentified person. The police began searching for soldiers who had been present that night. A witness reported seeing a mustachioed man in uniform wandering near the scene of the murder at around 2:30 a.m. Identification was made. 2 soldiers were suspected, but both had alibis. The trail quickly hit a dead end, and then Martha's case was forgotten. Like dozens of others in Whitechapel, the police believed it was a random murder, possibly motivated by jealousy or personal conflict. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. Less than a month later, a name would emerge, spreading terror throughout England. And then, people would look back at Martha Tabram's death as the opening shot in a series of crimes that would haunt the world for more than 100 years. NGY 31, Thang 8 NGM, 1888. August 31st, 1888. London was still covered in morning mist, and Whitechapel was still a seething cauldron of sin in the night. At about 3:40 a.m., a cabman was driving down Bucks Row, a deserted street deep in the working-class district. The faint light of a distant oil lamp was just enough to dimly illuminate the wet paving stones. And then, he stopped. In the middle of the deserted street, a woman's body lay motionless. Her skirt was pulled up to her waist, her head tilted to one side. At first he thought she was drunk, but as he got closer, he was horrified. It was a corpse. The police were called immediately. By lantern light, the scene revealed a truth more horrifying than any previous case in Whitechapel. The victim's throat had been cut so deeply that her head was almost severed. The abdomen was slashed from the chest to the groin, so deep that the intestines slid out. Blood poured all over the sidewalk, soaked the skirt and the street. This was no ordinary murder. This was a message, a brutal performance by a professional killer. The victim was identified as Mary Ann Nichols, 43 years old. She was a mother of 5, once married, but after divorce, alcohol and poverty pushed her to the bottom of society. She lived in temporary lodgings and worked as a prostitute to buy each loaf of bread. On the night of the murder, Mary was refused a room by the landlord because she did not have enough money. She walked out into the dark, muttering, "It's okay, I'll make a few cents before dawn." And then, she disappeared into the darkness forever. No one saw her with anyone. No one heard her scream. It all happened as quietly as a cold wind blowing through Whitechapel. The police were beginning to realize the Mary Ann Nichols case was unlike any crime they had ever committed. The killer had cut the throat, then disemboweled the stomach, and done it quickly, precisely, in the dark, on an empty street, without leaving any trace. There had been hundreds of murders in Whitechapel, but never before had anyone murdered and disemboweled a victim in the middle of the street. And from that moment on, the police knew something much more terrible was about to begin. This killer was not simply a murderer, he was a wild beast, with a blade in his hand, and the name he would bear would send shivers down the spines of England in a matter of weeks. Less than 8 days after the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, Whitechapel was once again plunged into horror. September 8, 1888. At about 5:30 a.m., a man living at 29 Hanbury Street opened his back door to prepare for the day. But as he stepped out into the yard, he stopped, dumbfounded. Before him lay the body of a woman, lying on her back just off the steps. Her skirt was pulled up, her head turned to one side, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the gray sky. Her neck had been cut deeply twice, almost severed. Her abdomen was completely ripped open, her internal organs exposed in a pool of blood, and, most horrifying of all, her uterus had been removed and taken away. The police quickly sealed off the scene. The forensic pathologist determined that the perpetrator had used a long, sharp knife, cutting open the victim's abdomen with the precision of someone who knew human anatomy. Annie Chapman, 47, was the next victim. She had been married, had children, but illness and poverty had driven her to the brink of death, living in cheap lodgings, drinking, and working as a prostitute to survive. The night before, she had run out of money to rent a bed. The landlord refused to let her in. Annie smiled, sadly. "Wait, I'll be back with a few pennies." She was last seen around 5 a.m., standing in the street talking to a man. A witness heard the man ask, "Do you agree?" And Annie replied, "Yes." Those were her last words. Police found at the scene a torn envelope, a piece of burlap, a comb, 2 pills, and hundreds of unanswered questions. But one thing was certain, Jack was escalating. He was no longer simply killing. He killed, dissected, and took his organs as a way of sending a message of defiance to society. And Whitechapel began to truly fear. People were afraid to go out after dark. Poor girls were afraid to go out with clients, afraid that the next time they stepped out would be their last. The police were criticized, the press was outraged, and all eyes were on the darkness of Whitechapel, where a true monster was roaming freely. The 30th of September, 1888. Whitechapel was about to enter the darkest night in its history. As the last carriages left the streets, as the sound of drinking in the roadside pub died away, Jack reappeared, this time with the speed of a sleepless ghost. At about 1 a.m., in Dutfield's yard, a narrow alleyway near Burner Street, the body of Elizabeth Stride was discovered. She lay on her side on the cold ground, her dress askew. Her throat had been cut sharply, and blood was still seeping in the pale moonlight. The strange thing was, Elizabeth's abdomen had not been cut open, unlike the previous victims. Investigators theorized, perhaps Jack had been interrupted. Someone had appeared and forced him to abandon his work. And sure enough, just 45 minutes later, a second body was found, this time that of Catherine Etos, 46 in Mitre Square, less than a kilometer from the scene of Elizabeth's murder. The scene, this time, was even more horrific. The neck had been deeply cut from left to right. Blood was splattered around the body. The abdomen had been slashed open. The internal organs had been pulled out. One kidney and most of the uterus had been removed and taken away. Not stopping there, Catherine's face had been slashed diagonally. from the bridge of her nose to her cheek, as if Jack had deliberately turned her face into a distorted picture of death. The forensics determined that all this had been done in less than 15 minutes. In the dark, in a place with absolutely no light, proving that the killer was very skilled, and determined. After Catherine's murder, the police discovered a piece of a bloody apron thrown nearby. On the wall next to it, in white chalk, was written, "The Jews are those who will not be unjustly blamed." The words were vague and unintelligible, but enough for the police to worry that it might inflame the anti-Semitism simmering in the area. The result? The words were immediately erased without time to photograph, without time to save, an act that historians have debated for centuries. 2 murders in the space of an hour, with a clear escalation in brutality and brazenness, shook London as never before. The press dubbed it the Bloody Night. People poured into the streets, and there was a murmur of anger, fear, and suspicion. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of local residents, was formed. They began patrolling at night, offering cash rewards for any leads. To no avail. Jack seemed to evaporate after each murder. No one saw him. No one heard his footsteps. Only the body, and the cold blade of his knife left a message. And Whitechapel knew. Jack had no intention of stopping. After a night of horrific massacres that had terrified London, the people of Whitechapel had barely recovered when another shock came, this time not of a dead body, but of a statement from the murderer himself. On September 27, 1888, the Central News Agency received a strange letter. The letter was written in red ink. The handwriting was crooked, the syntax was incorrect, but the tone was clear, sharp and full of arrogance. The letter began with a simple yet sarcastic greeting. "Dear boss." To the boss. The next content sent chills down the spine of anyone who read it. "I hear the police are about to arrest me. How ridiculous. I won't stop. I hate whores. I'll keep cutting them open until you catch me. I did a great job." On the last one, she didn't even have time to scream. "I love this job and you'll see my new works soon." And then, the last line of the letter went down in history. Signed, Jack the Ripper. This was the first time the name Jack the Ripper appeared. Before that, people called the murderer Leather Apron. But from the moment this letter was published, the whole of England and the world only knew one name, Jack the Ripper. At first, the police thought it was just a sick joke by an anonymous person, but then something caught them off guard. In the letter, he said he would cut off the victim's ear and send it to the police. And sure enough, a few days later, the victim Catherine Edo's left ear was found cut off. Coincidence? Or was it really a warning? More anonymous letters kept coming. The second letter was titled Saucy Jackie, describing exactly 2 murders in one night. The third, the most notorious, was titled From Hell. Inside was a small wooden box, containing half a human kidney, soaked in brandy. A note was scrawled, misspelled, as if written in a drunken stupor. "I am sending you half a kidney. The other half I have fried and eaten. It is delicious." The police could no longer take it lightly. They sent the kidney for testing, but the limitations of medicine at the time meant they could not confirm for certain whether it was Catherine Edos's, but whether it was real or not. The fear the letters brought was very real. Not only did Jack kill people, he had now become a living symbol of terror. A murderer who knew how to write letters, how to play, and how to sow chaos throughout an empire. The newspapers published the letters continuously, and the people talked endlessly. Some even began to admire Jack as an anti-hero, someone who challenged the system. But for those living in the slums of Whitechapel, there was nothing poetic about the name. For them, Jack the Ripper was not a name, but a curse. A curse that threatened to be resurrected every night when darkness fell. The 9th of November, 1888. London was bitterly cold. A thick fog hung over the old brick roofs of Whitechapel. A clerk knocked on the door of room 13 at 26 Dorset Street, where a young woman named Mary Jane Kelly lived. No one answered. The door was locked. From the inside, the windows were covered with blinds, but a piece of thin cloth had been temporarily stuck to the broken pane of glass on the side of the door. The clerk removed the cloth and peered inside, and then he screamed. The police were called immediately. When they broke down the door to the small room, a scene of hell unfolded, the most gruesome murder in the series. Mary Jane Kelly, only 25 years old, lay naked on the bed. Her throat was nearly severed, the face was slashed beyond recognition. As if the killer had deliberately erased her identity, the abdomen was completely cut open, the organs pulled out and piled around the room. Both breasts had been removed. The liver was placed at the feet, the heart and uterus gone. The police had never seen anything like it, not on the street, not in an alley, not in any previous murders. But this time, the killer had time. This was the only case that had taken place in a closed space inside a private room, uninterrupted, no one passing by. He could sit there, calmly dissecting Mary, like a sick artist working on his final masterpiece. Neighbors said that around 2 a.m., Mary was seen walking with a strange man, dark hair, wearing a soft hat. They chatted intimately, then disappeared into the night. That was the last time Mary was seen alive. The strange thing is, after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, Jack the Ripper disappeared. Forever, there were no more murders of this type. No disemboweled bodies, No letters to the newspapers, no arrests, no notes left behind. It was as if Jack had come to end it all by killing Mary, then retreated into the shadows, taking the truth with him, the police, the press, and the people called Mary the last of the classic five. She was also the youngest, the most beautiful, and the most brutally murdered. A brutal end, the end of a series of murders that had gripped Britain, and left an unanswered question that would linger for more than * 130 years. Who was Jack, and why did he stop? After Mary Jane Kelly was brutally murdered, the whole of England exploded. Newspapers reported the news by the hour. People gathered in the streets, talking in panic. The police were under terrible pressure from the royal family, the government, and the public. The question rang out everywhere. Who was Jack the Ripper? And then, the largest manhunt of the 19th century took place, with more than 2,000 people investigated, 80 people considered to be high-level suspects, but no one was convicted. Here are the most prominent suspects. 1. Montague. John Druitt. The mysterious young lawyer. Druitt was a young lawyer, from a family with a medical tradition. His father was a surgeon. Just a few weeks after the last case, Druitt's body was found floating in the Thames, suspected of suicide. His time of death coincided perfectly with the time Jack suddenly disappeared. Some have suggested that Druitt had inherited mental illness from his mother and grandmother, and that Mary Jane Kelly's death may have been the culmination of his final madness, but the police have found no direct evidence linking him to the crime scene. 2. Aaron Kosminski. Jewish. Barber Psychoty Kosminski was a Polish Jewish immigrant who worked as a barber in Whitechapel. He had a history of paranoia and violence towards women, and frequently heard voices in his head. In 1891, he was committed to a mental asylum, where he lived until his death in 2007. A collector claimed to have found Kosminski's DNA on a shawl belonging to victim Catherine Edos. However, because the scarf was once on public display, the DNA sample was difficult to absolutely authenticate, and the conclusion remains controversial to this day. 3. Francis Tumblety. The Weird Doctor and the Horror Collection. Tumblety was an American quack doctor, famous for his contempt for women, especially prostitutes. At a party, he once showed off his collection of female organs, including uteruses. He was arrested in Whitechapel for obscenity, then fled to America when he learned he was under suspicion. British police tried to extradite him, but were unsuccessful due to lack of evidence. He lived in America for the rest of his life, and forever remained an unproven suspect. For a shocking theory, Jill the Ripper. Some modern researchers even theorized that Jack could be a woman. They call this suspect Jill the Ripper, possibly a nurse or midwife, familiar with using knives and coming into contact with blood. Women could icily walk around the area at night without arousing suspicion. Although there is no specific name, this theory is supported by many because simply Jack has surpassed all logical expectations. Despite a series of theories and centuries of investigation, the police have never determined exactly who Jack the Ripper was. The case remains open, and to this day there is still no conclusion. A killer with a blade as sharp as a smile, a name that makes the empire tremble. An unsolved mystery. More than 130 years have passed. The world has changed. London has changed. The alleys of Whitechapel are now filled with modern lights and crowds, but the name Jack the Ripper still. They're like an unhealed cut on the face of British history. He was more than just a murderer. He was the first dark legend of the modern age, a symbol of fear, helplessness, and obsession. Theories of the sudden disappearance. Many questions have been raised. Why did Jack stop? Did he die? Was he arrested? Or was he simply bored? Some theories suggest that he was arrested for other crimes, or was taken to a mental hospital, like Kosminski. Others believe that Jack was a shipwright who only visited London on weekends. Coinciding with the time of the murders, there are even theories that the case was covered up by the government, as his identity may have been related to royalty or nobility, but in the end, it's all just theories. Nothing has been proven. Legacy and cultural impact. But what's even more amazing is how the name Jack the Ripper has survived the test of time. He has become the central character in hundreds of detective novels, films, games, investigative documents, and even comics and anime. Jack the Ripper tours in London still attract millions of people from all over the world, every year and in the public mind. Jack is not just a murderer but a symbol of a universal fear, an anonymous, intelligent, invisible killer, who kills silently and then disappears. He leaves behind nothing but a body and an unanswered question, and it is that absolute silence, that perfect mystery, that makes Jack a legend. If he ever existed as a flesh and blood man, then now, Jack the Ripper has become an untouchable ghost, haunting history and the imagination of humanity forever. Jack the Ripper. That name is no longer a person. It is a symbol of faceless evil, lurking in the darkest corners of society and in the human mind. People still try to find him. From Victorian detectives to modern researchers, they follow every trace, every DNA sample, every letter, scribbled in red ink. But after more than a century, the truth remains silent. Maybe Jack the Ripper never intended to be caught. Maybe he didn't need anyone to remember his face. Just that people never forget the feeling of fear he left. behind, and that's the scariest thing. Not because he killed, not because he was smart or cruel, but because he is still there in the shadows. In history books, in our minds. UNNAMEABLE, uncatchable. I can't understand it. Thank you for joining me on this bloody journey. If you like detective stories, mysteries, and real stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below so we can discuss it together. Maybe you will be the one to put together the last piece of the Jack the Ripper mystery. Or maybe only he knows the answer. See you in the next storytelling videos. Have a peaceful night, and don't forget to lock the door tightly.